Before we begin, I want to say something most people will never let themselves hear. Not because it's false, because it's true. And truth like this has a way of making people uncomfortable. Most people will scroll past a message like this. They'll see a title that stirs something in them for just a second, feel that quiet tension in their chest, and then move on. Not because they're too busy, not because they don't care, but because some part of them already knows this conversation is going to ask for honesty. And in the world we live in now, honesty is often more uncomfortable than distraction. But you're still here. And that matters. Because wasting your life rarely looks the way people imagine it does. It usually doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't arrive as some huge public collapse, some cinematic downfall, some obvious rock-bottom moment where everything shatters at once. That version is easier to recognize, easier to point to, easier to talk about. But for most people, life is not lost in one violent explosion. It's lost quietly, slowly, comfortably. It's lost in ordinary afternoons that disappear into scrolling, not because you're enjoying yourself, but because you've gone emotionally numb. It's lost in the dream you once cared deeply about, the project you swore you'd start, the folder that's been sitting untouched for years, silently waiting, silently accusing you every time you pass it. It's lost in those strange moments when you look in the mirror and realize the face is familiar, the voice is familiar, the routine is familiar, but somehow the person underneath no longer feels fully alive. And that is the silent tragedy. Not that life falls apart, but that it never fully begins. Somewhere along the way, without any one dramatic event to blame, you slowly stopped being the main character in your own life. You became someone who manages the days, checks the boxes, handles responsibilities, stays functional, stays reasonable, stays safe, but does not feel deeply connected to the life you're actually living. Here on Stoicism Breath, this is the conversation most people avoid. Because we are living in what I would call an age of functional stagnation. You may have a steady job. You may pay your bills on time. You may look, from the outside, like someone who has everything under control. You may be doing exactly what adulthood told you to do. And yet inside, there's this unsettling feeling that you are moving without really going anywhere. The years pass. The calendar flips. Your life continues. But something essential feels untouched, unused, unlived. You feel it late at night. In those quiet moments before sleep. That hollow restlessness. That subtle ache. That sense that something important in you is not being expressed. And this is not about hustle culture. It is not about becoming obsessed with achievement or productivity or squeezing more output out of your day. This is deeper than that. This is about the psychology of existence itself. Why do human beings settle for lives that feel merely acceptable when something in them knows they were built for more? Why do we stay in familiar discomfort instead of stepping toward meaningful uncertainty? Why does the cage we know feel safer than the open door we keep refusing to walk through? The philosopher Martin Heidegger had a phrase for this. He called it Das Man, the they. The idea was simple and devastating. Most people do not really live their own lives. They live the life they expect. They speak the language of other people's standards. They chase the version of success they inherited. They absorb the fears, the values, the assumptions of the crowd until they no longer know which desires are truly theirs. They become so fluent in other people's expectations that they lose contact with their own voice. And once that happens, life becomes imitation. Polite, efficient, socially acceptable imitation. Breaking free from that does not happen in one dramatic moment. It is not some lightning bolt awakening where everything suddenly becomes clear. It is slower than that, more demanding than that. It is a daily confrontation with truth, a repeated decision to stop lying to yourself about what your comfort is costing you. Because comfort is not always safety. Sometimes comfort is decay with soft lighting. Sometimes your comfort zone is not a sanctuary. It is a velvet-lined coffin. It feels familiar. It looks fine from the outside. It asks very little of you. But inside it, nothing grows. That is why this conversation matters. We are not here for surface-level motivation. We are not here for phrases that sound good for 10 minutes and disappear by tomorrow morning. We are here for something harder and far more valuable. 5 brutal, honest truths that quietly act like emergency brakes on human potential. Not dramatic slogans. Not recycled life advice. Real shifts in perception. The kind that force you to see your life differently. And if you can stay with these truths, really stay with them. If you can resist the urge to simply agree and then return to autopilot, something begins to change. You begin to reclaim the time, energy, and identity you've been handing over to things that never deserved them in the first place. If you are tired of the autopilot version of yourself, the one that keeps postponing what matters, the one that keeps saying, later, to the life you know you want, then this is where the real conversation begins. Now let's move into the first brutal truth, and this one hits deeper than most people expect. Because the biggest reason many people keep postponing their dreams isn't laziness, it isn't lack of intelligence, and it's not even lack of opportunity. It's biology. Your brain is naturally wired to protect comfort. It prefers routines, predictability, and familiar patterns because those things feel safe. From an evolutionary point of view, safety meant survival. So whenever information shows up that challenges your habits, your identity, or your direction in life, your brain quietly resists it. Not because you are weak, but because your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. But here's the turning point. At some moment in life, every person who chooses growth has to override that instinct. They have to consciously choose awareness over comfort. They have to stop drifting and start steering. Here on Stoicism Breath, this is where real change begins. When you decide you're done living on autopilot and ready to wake up to the truth about your own life. And the first truth we need to confront is something psychologists and economists call the sunk cost fallacy, but in real life, it shows up as the weight of a false identity. In economics, a sunk cost is money that has already been spent and cannot be recovered. Smart investors are taught to ignore sunk costs when making future decisions. Why? Because the money is already gone. The only question that matters is, what choice serves me best moving forward? But in life, most people do the exact opposite. Instead of ignoring sunk costs, they build entire lives around them. And here's what makes this dangerous. In life, sunk costs are not just money. They are time, energy, emotions, years of effort. Years of trying to become someone you thought you were supposed to be. Think about how often this happens. Someone spends 4 years studying a degree they secretly hate, but keeps going because they've already invested too much time to quit now. Someone stays in a relationship long after the connection has faded, not because it still brings joy, but because there's shared history, shared routines, shared expectations. Someone keeps climbing a career ladder that leads nowhere meaningful, not because they love the work, but because turning around feels like admitting failure. And so they stay. Not because it's right, but because leaving feels expensive. Yet here is the brutal truth, and also the liberating one. The time you spent is already gone. Whether you stay or leave, that time does not return. Staying in the wrong place for 5 more years does not recover the 5 years you already lost. It only doubles the cost of the mistake. It adds more frustration, more exhaustion, more regret, all to protect an ego that doesn't want to admit it made the wrong choice. And this shows up everywhere in everyday life. It's the lost student who wakes up every morning dreading class, but refuses to pivot because stopping now feels like wasting years. It's the person trapped in a relationship that quietly drained their happiness 2 years ago, but they stay because of the apartment lease, the shared friend group, the memories that feel too heavy to walk away from. These are not rare stories. They are common ones. In fact, most people are quietly paying a daily tax, not with money, but with time, because they are unwilling to cut their losses. And here's where many people get confused. They mistake consistency for growth. But those are not the same thing. Consistency in the right direction builds strength, skill, and purpose. But consistency in the wrong direction is just a long-term error dressed up as discipline. It looks responsible from the outside, but inside, it slowly suffocates your potential. Many of us are fiercely loyal, almost stubbornly loyal, to versions of ourselves that no longer fit. Maybe when you were 18, you imagined a certain career, a certain lifestyle, a certain identity. And back then, it made sense. But now, years later, your values have changed. Your priorities have evolved. Your understanding of yourself has deepened. And yet, you keep forcing yourself into that old identity. It's like trying to wear clothes 3 sizes too small and wondering why it feels so hard to breathe. This connects to something psychologists call narrative identity theory, the idea that human beings are storytelling creatures. From childhood, we create internal stories about who we are. And once those stories are written, we spend years defending them, even when they are hurting us. If your internal story says, "I am someone who never quits," then every time you feel the urge to walk away from something unhealthy, your mind interprets it as weakness. If your story says, "I am loyal," you may stay loyal to people and situations long after that loyalty stops making sense. And without realizing it, you become trapped, not by circumstances, but by the identity you created years ago. But here is the shift that changes everything. Quitting is not always failure. Sometimes quitting is wisdom. Sometimes walking away is the bravest decision you can make, not because it erases the past, but because it protects your future. A simple but powerful exercise can reveal the truth. Look at the biggest commitments in your life right now, your job, your daily habits, your relationships, your routines. Then ask yourself one brutally honest question. If I were starting fresh today, with zero history and zero investment, would I choose this again? Would you apply for that job today if you saw it listed for the first time? Would you begin that relationship today if you met the same person now? Would you choose those habits if they weren't already familiar? If the honest answer is no, not, maybe, not, it's complicated, but truly no, then you are not investing anymore. You are paying a daily emotional cost to protect a past version of yourself that no longer reflects who you are becoming. And the Stoics understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. They believed identity was not fixed. It was something shaped through conscious choice. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that you have power over your mind, not over external events, not over what has already happened, but over what you choose next. And that is where your freedom lives. Not in undoing the past, but in refusing to let it dictate your future. And this is where many people quietly lose themselves, not because they lack strength, but because they stay loyal far beyond the point where loyalty makes sense. They stay loyal to situations that drain them, loyal to relationships that no longer nurture them, loyal to identities that stopped fitting years ago. And slowly, without realizing it, they become prisoners of their own self-image, locked inside a story they wrote years ago but never bothered to update. Think about that for a moment. How many decisions in your life today are still being made by a version of you that no longer exists? Maybe it's the career path you chose when you were young, before you understood what truly mattered to you. Maybe it's a habit you picked up years ago that once felt helpful but now quietly holds you back. Maybe it's a belief about who you are. I'm not creative. I'm not brave. I'm not the kind of person who takes risks. And you keep repeating that story, not because it's true anymore, but because it feels familiar. But here's the truth that Stoic thinkers understood deeply. To live with genuine purpose, you must be willing to become what some people will call a traitor to your past self. Yes, a traitor. Not to your values, but to your outdated identity. You have to become comfortable with people saying, "You've changed." Because of course you have. You are supposed to change. Everything alive changes. Everything that grows evolves. The only things that stay exactly the same are things that are no longer alive. Change is not betrayal. Change is honesty. It is the most truthful act you can perform for the person you are becoming. And here's a simple test, one you can apply right now, that reveals whether you are still living intentionally or simply continuing by habit. Look at the 3 or 4 biggest commitments in your life. Your job, your closest relationships, your daily habits, the routines that shape your weeks. Then ask yourself with brutal honesty, if I were starting fresh today, with zero history, zero time invested, would I choose this again? Would you apply for your current job if you saw the listing today? Would you step into your relationship if you were meeting that person for the first time now? Would you choose your daily routine if it weren't already familiar? And here's the key, not. It's complicated, not. Mostly yes, but a clear, honest answer. If the real answer is no, then you are no longer investing. You are paying. Paying a daily tax, not in money, but in energy, attention, and emotional exhaustion, all because fear tells you it's safer to stay than to change. Carl Jung once said something that cuts directly through this illusion. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. But most people never live that truth. They live as what happened to them. They become the degree they chose when they were confused at 18. They become the town they stayed in because leaving felt too uncomfortable. They become the identity they inherited from family, culture, or fear. And over time, they forget something incredibly powerful. Your identity is not a finished product. It is a working draft. It can be revised. It can be rewritten. It can be reshaped. And you, not your past, not your circumstances, hold the pen. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology gave it language. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And he wasn't only talking about storms, conflicts, or difficult people. He was talking about the internal story, the narrative you carry inside your own mind, long after it stopped serving you. The Stoic path asks for one simple but difficult act. Learn to distinguish between what you truly are and what merely happened to you. Because what happened to you is not your identity. Epictetus proved this with his own life. He was born into slavery, a condition that could have defined his entire existence. He had every reason to believe he was limited, powerless, trapped. But he refused to let circumstances define his character. Instead, he focused on what remained in his control, his choices, his mindset, his response. He said it simply: make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. That principle alone transformed him from a slave into one of history's most respected philosophers. And the same possibility exists for you. You are not required to remain loyal to a version of yourself that no longer fits. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to release the weight of who you used to be, so you can step fully into who you are becoming. Now let's move to the second brutal truth, one that looks productive on the surface, but quietly drains meaning from life. The illusion of productive distraction. If we're being completely honest, busy has become one of the most socially accepted disguises for a wasted life. In today's culture, busyness is worn like a badge of honor. A packed schedule looks impressive. A full calendar feels important. We treat exhaustion like evidence of dedication. We answer emails late at night to prove our worth. We skip meals to show commitment. We talk about how tired we are the same way athletes talk about intense training, with quiet pride. But beneath that pride, there is a dangerous misunderstanding. Because there is a massive difference between motion and progress. You can run on a treadmill for 2 hours, sweat heavily, burn real calories, and feel completely exhausted, yet never move an inch forward. That is exactly what productive distraction looks like in modern life. Enormous effort. Real fatigue. Zero meaningful movement. Many people fill their days with what I call low-stakes maintenance work. They respond instantly to minor emails, as if speed equals value. They polish documents that didn't need polishing. They attend meetings that produce no real change. They research endlessly, telling themselves they are preparing, when in truth, preparation has quietly become procrastination wearing a professional disguise. And this happens for one deeply human reason. The work that actually changes your life, the meaningful, high-stakes work, is frightening. Writing the first page of a book means confronting the possibility that it might not be good. Starting a new path means risking rejection. Having an honest conversation means risking discomfort or loss. And so instead of facing those fears, many people stay busy with safer tasks. Tasks that feel productive. Tasks that feel responsible. Tasks that never force them to confront their true potential. And slowly, day by day, motion replaces meaning, and activity replaces progress. And this is where the illusion becomes dangerous, when activity starts to look like achievement. We spend hours perfecting the visual formatting of documents that didn't truly need it. We attend meetings that could have been solved with a single clear message. We dive deep into research about our goals, reading articles, watching tutorials, organizing notes, until the research itself quietly becomes a substitute for the real action. We tell ourselves we are preparing. We tell ourselves we are getting ready. But preparation without action is not preparation at all. It is procrastination, dressed in more respectable clothing. And if we are honest, the real reason this happens has nothing to do with laziness. It has everything to do with fear. Because the real work, the meaningful, identity-shaping work, is terrifying. Writing the first page of a book forces you to face a painful possibility. What if you are not as talented as you hoped? Starting the business idea you've been thinking about means risking rejection, criticism, maybe even public failure. Having the difficult conversation you've been avoiding means risking conflict, misunderstanding, or even the loss of a relationship. These are not imaginary fears. They are deeply human fears. And your brain, designed primarily for survival, not greatness, will always try to steer you toward the safer option. The smaller task. The easier win. The low-risk action that protects your sense of comfort. Unless you take conscious control, autopilot will always choose safety over significance. That's why many people live in what looks like constant motion, but never experience real transformation. They stay in what psychologists call perpetual preparation mode. And this mode is a powerful defense mechanism. Because if you are always preparing, you never have to face the possibility of failure. You are not failing. You are just not ready yet. You are still researching, still organizing, still planning, still getting ready. And as long as you stay in that state, you remain protected from the discomfort of trying and falling short. Psychologists call this productivity theater, performing the appearance of progress, often only for yourself, while the real work remains untouched. It feels productive. It looks responsible. But deep down, nothing meaningful moves forward. And here's where the science becomes incredibly revealing. There is a principle known as the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule. It tells us that roughly 80% of meaningful results in life come from just 20% of our actions. Not the busy work, not the maintenance tasks, but the small number of deeply meaningful actions, the creative, courageous, direction-changing work. Yet for most people, that critical 20% gets pushed aside every single day by urgent but trivial tasks. Emails that feel important but change nothing. Notifications that demand attention but add no value. Small responsibilities that multiply until the day disappears without a single meaningful step forward. And slowly, something tragic happens. We become extremely skilled at things that do not matter. We become efficient at maintenance, responsive to noise, organized in systems that keep us busy but not fulfilled. Meanwhile, the work that could actually change our lives, the book idea, the new skill, the business, the creative expression, the honest conversation, sits quietly on a to-do list we never quite reach. There is another principle worth remembering here, something called the law of forced efficiency. It states a simple but powerful truth. There is never enough time to do everything. But there is always enough time to do the most important thing. Think about that. When you hear yourself say, "I don't have time," translate it honestly. What you are really saying is, "That is not my priority right now." Because every person you admire, every leader, creator, thinker, innovator, lived with the same 24 hours you have today. Marcus Aurelius had 24 hours. Seneca had 24 hours. Every person who built something meaningful had exactly the same number of hours in a day. The difference was never time. It was focus. It was clarity. It was the ruthless willingness to choose what mattered and ignore what did not. And here is a simple exercise that can reveal the truth about your life with uncomfortable clarity. Look back over the last 48 hours. Not the ideal version of them, the real version. Ask yourself, how many of those hours were spent maintaining what already exists? Maintaining current habits. Maintaining relationships at their current level. Maintaining routines that keep life stable but unchanged. And how many hours were spent building something new? Learning something meaningful. Creating something valuable. Taking a step toward a future that excites you. If most of your time is spent maintaining rather than building, then you are not truly living a growing life. You are managing one. And a managed life is not the same as a lived life. Purpose does not come from clearing your inbox. It does not come from replying fastest. It does not come from being the most responsive person in the room. Purpose comes from direction. It comes from stepping out of the role of manager and stepping into the role of architect. Instead of just getting things done, you begin doing the right things. And that difference, though subtle in language, transforms everything in practice. Writer Annie Dillard once said something that captures this perfectly. How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. Not our decades. Not our distant future. Our days. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The quiet evening. The small decision to either drift or act. If your days blur into a constant stream of minor tasks, digital noise, and low-stakes activity, then your one irreplaceable life, will blur in exactly the same way. And that is why cutting through the noise matters. Because beneath all the distractions, there is a signal, the quiet but persistent voice pointing you toward what truly matters. And learning to hear that signal is where a purposeful life begins. If your days are filled with digital noise and endless low-stakes maintenance, then your one irreplaceable, non-refundable life, slowly turns into a blur of missed opportunities and unfinished meaning. Not because you lacked ability, but because your attention was scattered across things that never truly mattered. That is why, here on Stoicism Breath, we return again and again to one essential skill, cutting through the noise so you can finally hear the signal, the quiet but persistent voice telling you what you are actually here to build. The Stoics understood this long before smartphones, emails, and endless notifications existed. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." He was not complaining about life being too brief. He was pointing out something far more uncomfortable, that much of our time slips away not because life is short, but because we spend it on things that never deserved our attention in the first place. Marcus Aurelius took that insight and turned it into a daily discipline. He reminded himself to confine his attention to the present moment, not yesterday's unfinished tasks, not tomorrow's imagined plans, but the single most meaningful action available right now. That is where purposeful people live, inside the present, inside the work that matters most, not inside distractions that feel urgent but leave no lasting impact. And yet, despite knowing this, many people still fall into what can only be called the paralysis of the perfect season. There is a quiet belief that lives inside many adults, especially those balancing careers, families, responsibilities, and health, a belief that one day, a perfect season will arrive. A time when everything finally aligns. The finances will feel secure. The relationship will be stable. The kids will need less attention. Work will calm down. Health will feel strong. Energy will be high. And when that magical season arrives, then, and only then, life will truly begin. It sounds responsible. It sounds mature. It even sounds wise. But when you look closely, it becomes clear that this perfect season has never existed, not once, in the history of your life. Think back carefully. Was there ever a stretch of months where nothing unexpected happened? No sudden expense. No health concern. No work pressure. No family responsibility. No emotional challenge. No new obstacle demanding your attention. That season does not exist. It never has. And it never will. Because life is not a calm ocean interrupted by storms. Life is constant movement, overlapping responsibilities, shifting priorities, unexpected demands arriving before the previous ones have even resolved. Waiting for calm before taking action is like waiting for the ocean to stop moving before learning how to swim. And if you continue waiting for the right time to pursue what truly matters, something painful eventually happens. Years pass. Then decades. And one day, you look back with a kind of clarity that only comes when time feels limited, realizing that the perfect moment you were waiting for never arrived. Instead, many people use the future as a storage unit for their present-day fear. They imagine a future version of themselves who is somehow stronger, braver, more disciplined, more energized. A version with fewer excuses and more clarity. A version who finally feels ready. But here is the truth that many people avoid facing. Your future self is simply you, with less time remaining. Not more courage magically appearing. Not more energy appearing from nowhere. Just the same habits, repeated over years, becoming more deeply ingrained. Every day you choose waiting instead of starting, you are not building readiness. You are building hesitation. You are training your mind to delay, to postpone, to hesitate again tomorrow. Psychologists call this pattern temporal discounting, the brain's natural tendency to choose immediate comfort over long-term reward. When faced with discomfort today versus growth in the future, the brain almost always chooses what feels safe in the moment. Not because you are weak. Not because you lack discipline. But because your brain was built for survival, not for greatness. Understanding this changes everything. Because once you recognize the mechanism, you gain the power to override it. There is another psychological principle that explains why waiting feels heavier than action, something known as the Zeigarnik effect. It describes how unfinished tasks remain active in your mind, creating subtle tension that never fully disappears. When you tell yourself, "I'll start next year," the idea does not vanish. It lingers. Quietly. In the background of your thoughts. Adding weight. Adding pressure. Adding mental fatigue. Every postponed dream becomes another unfinished loop in your mind, draining your energy even while you appear to be resting. That's why waiting does not create peace. Waiting creates tension. And action, even imperfect action, creates relief. The Stoics understood this truth deeply. They did not wait for ideal conditions before acting. They moved forward in imperfect conditions, with incomplete resources, uncertain outcomes, and real fear. Because they understood something powerful. You do not need perfect timing. You need movement. You do not need total certainty. You need commitment. You do not need a flawless season. You need a single step taken today, inside the chaos, not after it disappears. On Stoicism Breath, this is the turning point, the moment where awareness becomes action, the moment where waiting stops feeling safe, and starting begins to feel necessary. Because the perfect season is not coming. But the present moment, imperfect, messy, inconvenient, is already here. And it is more than enough to begin. There is a hidden tension that many people carry every single day, and most don't even realize where it comes from. It comes from the things left undone, the projects never started, the conversations postponed, the goals pushed into the future. Psychologists call this the tension of unfinished tasks, and on Stoicism Breath, this idea becomes incredibly important to understand because it explains why waiting rarely brings peace. When you tell yourself, "I'll start next year," something unexpected happens. You don't feel relief. You don't feel rest. Instead, your brain keeps that idea open, running quietly in the background like an app that never shuts down. Each time you delay, the weight grows a little heavier. Not visibly, not dramatically, but subtly, like carrying a backpack that slowly fills with stones you never remove. That's why waiting does not restore your energy. Waiting drains it. Every postponed dream, every unfinished goal, every idea you mean to begin someday adds invisible pressure to your mind. It builds anxiety without obvious cause. It creates fatigue without clear explanation. Many people believe they are tired because life is demanding, but in truth, they are exhausted from carrying the invisible weight of everything they haven't started. And this is where the illusion of the perfect season reveals itself for what it truly is, a mirage. No matter how long you walk toward it, it stays the same distance away. You tell yourself, "When things calm down, I'll begin." Then something new appears, a responsibility, a problem, a distraction, and the beginning moves further into the future again. But here is the reality that the Stoics understood deeply. The only moment you truly have power over is now. Not tomorrow. Not next month. Not after the next life transition. This exact moment, imperfect, inconvenient, noisy, is the only moment that belongs to you. Circumstances will always be imperfect. Resources will always feel slightly insufficient. Confidence will never feel complete before you begin. Waiting for perfect conditions is like waiting for the wind to stop before setting sail. You will remain stuck at shore forever. The Stoics never waited for life to become easier before taking action. They moved forward inside imperfect conditions, with full awareness, full commitment, and full presence. If your home is noisy, begin anyway. If you are tired, begin anyway. If your voice shakes during a difficult conversation, speak anyway. Because an imperfect beginning taken today is infinitely more powerful than a perfect beginning that never happens at all. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "Do not indulge in dreams of what you do not have, but count the blessings you actually possess." He was not telling himself to lower his ambitions. He was reminding himself to stop using imaginary future conditions as an excuse to avoid working with the real conditions already in front of him. And Seneca added another layer of wisdom, one that still applies powerfully today. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But opportunity does not wait for you to feel ready. It does not pause until you gain confidence. It does not arrive on a convenient schedule. It appears suddenly, unexpectedly, and those who are already moving, even imperfectly, are the ones prepared to meet it. That was the Stoic strategy. Never wait for luck. Never wait for perfection. Stay in motion so that when opportunity arrives, you are already heading in the right direction. Because momentum creates readiness, not the other way around. And this leads directly into one of the most misunderstood and quietly destructive forces in modern life, the perfectionism paradox. At first glance, perfectionism looks admirable. It feels responsible. It feels disciplined. It feels like caring deeply about quality. Many people proudly describe themselves as perfectionists, especially in professional settings. They wear the label like a badge of honor, believing it signals dedication, intelligence, and high standards. But when you step back and observe what perfectionism actually does to a life over time, a different picture appears. Many people are not stuck because they lack ambition. They are stuck because their ambition is so high that they become paralyzed. They set such impossible standards for themselves that nothing ever feels good enough to begin. And in today's world, especially in a culture shaped by social media and constant comparison. This pressure becomes even stronger. Every day, people are exposed to polished results, perfect highlights, and finished masterpieces. They see the final version of someone else's success, the finished book, the successful business, the viral video, but they never see the messy early drafts, the failed attempts, the long nights of uncertainty that built it. So when they look at their own beginnings, rough, uncertain, incomplete, they feel embarrassment. They feel shame. They feel the painful gap between what they imagine and what they can currently produce. And to protect themselves from that discomfort, they choose the safest path of all. They stop creating. They stay in the idea phase. They keep their dreams inside their minds, where everything can remain perfect, untouched, untested, and free from judgment. Because inside your head, an idea can always be flawless. But in the real world, every idea, without exception, begins imperfect. That is the paradox at the center of perfectionism. By refusing to be a beginner, you guarantee that you will never become an expert. Every master was once clumsy. Every expert was once uncertain. Every successful person once produced work that was awkward, incomplete, and imperfect. And the only difference between those who succeed and those who remain stuck is that one group allowed themselves to begin before they felt ready. By refusing to be a beginner, you quietly guarantee that you will never become an expert. That truth may feel uncomfortable, but on Stoicism Breath, it is one of the most liberating realities to accept. There is no shortcut through the learning curve. No secret path that skips the awkward, clumsy, deeply humbling early stages of mastering anything meaningful. Think about anyone you admire, an author whose books changed your perspective, an entrepreneur who built something from nothing, an athlete who performs with confidence, or even a teacher who speaks with calm authority. None of them started that way. Every single one of them was once uncertain, inexperienced, and frankly, not very good. They created work that didn't impress anyone. They made mistakes that others noticed. They failed in ways that felt embarrassing. They looked unpolished, unsure, even amateurish. But here is the defining difference. They kept going. They didn't stop after one awkward attempt. They didn't quit after the first criticism. They kept producing imperfect attempts again and again until slowly, almost invisibly at first, the quality of their work began to rise. Over time, repetition transformed uncertainty into confidence. Practice turned hesitation into mastery. Their output eventually matched the vision they carried in their minds. Purposeful living requires something many people are never taught: a tolerance for embarrassment, a willingness to be seen learning, a willingness to be the least experienced person in the room and stay there anyway, a willingness to publish something that feels 80% ready instead of waiting endlessly for it to feel perfect. Because 80% shared with the world creates growth. But 100% hidden inside a draft folder creates nothing. Modern psychology supports this idea in powerful ways. Research by psychologist Carol Dweck revealed a profound difference between what she called the fixed mindset and the growth mindset, two ways of interpreting the exact same experience. A fixed mindset treats failure like a verdict on identity. When something goes wrong, the internal message becomes, "I failed, therefore I am a failure." In this mindset, mistakes feel permanent and personal. They feel like proof that you are not capable. But a growth mindset sees failure differently. It treats failure as information, data, feedback. When something doesn't work, the message becomes, "That approach didn't work, which means I now know what to try differently next time." Two people can experience the same setback and walk away with completely different futures. One stops, the other adapts. And over time, those two responses create entirely different lives. If you are deeply afraid of being seen as average, unfinished, or not there yet, you will never take the visible risks required to become extraordinary. You will stay inside the comfortable boundaries of what you already know, repeating familiar routines, protecting your ego, avoiding exposure. But there is a hidden danger in staying comfortable. Skills that are not challenged slowly become outdated. Confidence that is not tested becomes fragile. Competence that is never stretched becomes obsolete. And in today's world, there is another challenge that intensifies this fear: social comparison. Human beings are naturally wired to compare themselves to others. For most of human history, this made sense. The people around you were limited: a small village, a local community, a manageable group of individuals whose skills were roughly similar to yours. But today, the people you compare yourself to are not your neighbors. They are the top performers in the world, the most polished creators, the most successful entrepreneurs, the most accomplished professionals. Every day, your screen shows you curated highlight reels, filtered, edited, perfected moments from years of effort that happened behind the scenes. And when you compare your first week to someone else's 10th year, it doesn't create motivation. It creates discouragement. It creates hesitation. It creates an imaginary barrier that feels impossible to cross. But that comparison is fundamentally flawed. You are not competing with them. You are competing with the version of yourself who hesitated this morning, the version who stayed comfortable instead of taking action. That is the only comparison that matters. Start something today that you already know will be imperfect. Write the awkward first paragraph. Record the unpolished first video. Send the rough first draft that still makes you slightly uncomfortable. Because right now, the goal is not perfection. The goal is tolerance. Tolerance for imperfection. Tolerance for learning. Tolerance for being seen as a work in progress. That is what every honest, growing, purposeful human being truly is. Not finished, not flawless, but evolving. Lower the bar for starting. That is the only reliable path to raising the bar for achievement later. Even the Stoics understood this deeply. They practiced something called premeditatio malorum, the deliberate mental preparation for difficulty before it happened. Instead of imagining smooth success, they visualized obstacles, setbacks, delays, and imperfect outcomes. Not to discourage action, but to normalize struggle. So when challenges arrived, they were not shocked. They were not ashamed. They saw difficulty as a natural part of growth, not as proof of personal inadequacy. Epictetus taught this lesson clearly to his students. Seek not the good in external things, seek it in yourself.